My dad never let anyone near his 1971 Road Runner. The key was in his will. In the Rust Belt town of Youngstown, Ohio, 28-year-old Marcus Thompson has spent his entire life watching his father David obsess over a pristine 1971 Plymouth Road Runner that sits locked away in their garage, untouched, undriven, and absolutely off-limits to everyone, including family. When David suddenly passes away from a heart attack, Marcus inherits not just the car, but a mystery that has haunted their family for decades. Hidden within his father's will is a cryptic message about the real treasure and a key that doesn't fit the car's ignition. As Marcus delves deeper into his father's past, he uncovers a web of secrets involving a long-lost love, a tragic accident, and a sacrifice that shaped his entire family's destiny. This emotional journey of discovery transforms Marcus's relationship with his deceased father and reveals that sometimes the most precious inheritances aren't material possessions, but the lessons and love that come with understanding the truth. If these stories moved you, imagine what's coming next. Subscribe to Rust and Memory, because some engines don't just start cars, they start memories. Chapter 1. The Untouchable Dream. The October rain drummed against the aluminum siding of the Thompson house on Oak Street, each droplet echoing through the silence that had settled over the modest two-story home since the funeral 3 days ago. Marcus Thompson sat at the kitchen table, staring at the yellowed envelope containing his father's will, the coffee in his mug growing cold as the morning light filtered through rain-streaked windows. At 28, Marcus had always been the responsible one, the son who stayed close to home while his younger sister Emma pursued her journalism career in Chicago, the one who checked on their father David every weekend, who made sure the old man took his blood pressure medication and didn't spend all day in that damn garage with his precious car, the 1971 Plymouth Road Runner. Plum crazy purple with white racing stripes, sitting in their detached garage like a shrine to American muscle car glory. Marcus had grown up hearing the engines rumble during his father's weekend ritual of starting it up, letting it idle for exactly 10 minutes, then shutting it down, never driving it, never even letting anyone else touch it. 37 years. Marcus muttered to the empty kitchen, his voice hoarse from crying at the funeral. 37 years he's owned that car, and I've never even seen him drive it around the block. The house felt impossibly large without David's presence, without the sound of classic rock drifting from the garage, without the smell of motor oil and WD-40 that seemed to follow him everywhere. Marcus had moved back into his childhood bedroom temporarily, unable to face returning to his cramped apartment across town while dealing with the estate. His phone buzzed against the worn Formica table. Emma's name appeared on the screen, probably calling from her trendy Chicago loft with its exposed brick walls and modern furniture, everything their blue-collar Youngstown home wasn't. "Hey, Em," he answered, trying to inject some energy into his voice. "Marcus, honey, how are you holding up?" Emma's voice carried that careful tone people used when they weren't sure if you were about to break down crying. "I keep thinking I should have stayed longer after the funeral. I hate that you're dealing with all this paperwork alone." Marcus glanced around the kitchen with its avocado green appliances from the 1970s and the cracked linoleum floor their father had always promised to replace. "I'm managing. Just going through Dad's papers, trying to figure out what needs to be handled first." "Have you looked at the will yet?" The envelope seemed to pulse with significance as Marcus reached for it. "About to. I've been putting it off, I guess. It feels so final, you know? I get it. But Marcus, whatever's in there, we'll figure it out together, okay? And hey, at least you'll finally get your hands on that stupid car he was always obsessing over." Marcus couldn't help but smile at that. Emma had never understood their father's automotive passion, had rolled her eyes every time David launched into another story about the Road Runner's 446-pack engine, or its original rally wheels. She'd escaped to college at Northwestern and never looked back, visiting only for holidays and spending most of those visits texting friends from her old bedroom. "Yeah, maybe I'll finally learn what the big deal was," Marcus said, though he wasn't sure he wanted to. The car represented everything that had driven a wedge between him and his father over the years. The weekends David spent polishing chrome instead of attending Marcus's baseball games, the family vacations that were cut short because David worried about leaving the car unattended, the countless conversations that were interrupted when David heard a noise from the garage and had to go check on his baby. "Listen, I have to run to a meeting, but call me after you read it, okay? Love you, Marcus." "Love you too, Em." After hanging up, Marcus sat in the silence for another few minutes, listening to the rain and the occasional creak of the old house settling. Finally, he opened the envelope with hands that trembled slightly, unfolding the legal documents that would officially transfer his father's possessions to his children. Most of it was standard stuff. The house would be sold, and the proceeds split between Marcus and Emma, along with the modest savings account and David's retirement fund from his 32 years at the GM plant before it closed. But then, Marcus reached a handwritten addendum that made his breath catch. "To my son, Marcus, who has always been there when I needed him most, I leave my 1971 Plymouth Road Runner and all contents of the garage. But more importantly, I leave you the responsibility of discovering what I could never find the courage to tell you in life. Look for the truth, where the treasure lies hidden. The key to everything is in the glove compartment. Not the key you think you need, but the one that unlocks what really matters. I'm sorry I was never the father you deserved, but maybe now you can understand why I held on so tight to some things and not tight enough to others. The car was never about the car, son. It was about preserving something precious until I could figure out how to share it without losing it forever." Marcus read the passage 3 times, his father's distinctive handwriting blurring as his eyes filled with tears. David Thompson had never been a man of many words, preferring actions to lengthy conversations, and certainly never one for cryptic messages or emotional revelations. This felt like receiving a letter from a stranger who happened to share his father's memories. Rising from the table, Marcus grabbed his jacket and headed for the garage, his heart pounding with a mixture of anticipation and dread. The side door opened with its familiar squeak, and he fumbled for the light switch, illuminating the sacred space his father had kept meticulously organized for nearly 4 decades. The Road Runner sat exactly where it always had, its purple paint gleaming under the fluorescent lights, despite the layer of dust that had settled over everything in the past week. David's workbench stretched along the far wall, every tool hanging in its designated spot, coffee cans filled with sorted nuts and bolts, and boxes of spare parts arranged with military precision. Marcus had been in the garage thousands of times over the years, but always as an observer, never as someone with permission to touch. Now, approaching the car felt like approaching a wild animal that might bolt if he moved too quickly. The driver's side door handle was chrome and cold under his fingers. He'd watched his father grip this same handle countless times during those weekend warm-up sessions, but he'd never touched it himself. The door opened with a solid thunk that spoke to the build quality of American cars from an era when steel was thick and craftsmanship mattered. The interior was pristine, black vinyl bench seats with not a crack or stain visible, original AM/FM radio, 4-speed pistol grip shifter rising from the center console like a chrome monument to automotive performance. The odometer showed 47,329 miles, which seemed impossible for a car that was over 50 years old. Marcus slid behind the wheel, his hands gripping the steering wheel where his father's hands had rested so many times. The seat was positioned perfectly for his height, as if David had adjusted it with his son in mind. For a moment, he just sat there, trying to absorb the significance of finally being inside his father's most prized possession. Then he remembered the message about the glove compartment. The small chrome handle clicked open, revealing the usual collection of car documents, registration, insurance papers, owner's manual, but there, tucked beneath everything else, was a small brass key attached to a keychain Marcus had never seen before. It wasn't a car key, but something smaller, more delicate, with Youngstown Trust and Savings engraved on the attached metal tag. A safety deposit box key. Marcus stared at it, his mind racing. His father had banked at Fifth Third for as long as Marcus could remember, and he'd never mentioned having a safety deposit box anywhere else. Youngstown Trust and Savings had been closed for at least 15 years, a victim of the economic downturn that had claimed so many local businesses. But the message had been clear. The key to everything is in the glove compartment. Not the key you think you need, but the one that unlocks what really matters. Marcus pocketed the key and continued searching the glove compartment, finding one more item that made his heart skip. A small black and white photograph, edges worn from handling. It showed a young woman with dark hair and a bright smile, standing next to what appeared to be the same Roadrunner, but the background was unfamiliar. She was beautiful in that timeless way of old photographs, wearing a simple dress and radiating happiness that seemed to leap off the faded paper. On the back, in his father's younger handwriting, were the words, Maria Santos, June 1971, the day everything changed. Marcus had never heard his father mention anyone named Maria Santos. His mother, Catherine, had died when Marcus was 15, and as far as he knew, she'd been David's only serious relationship. They'd married young, had their children, and lived what appeared to be a stable, if quiet, life together until cancer took her. But this photograph suggested another story entirely, one that predated his parents' marriage by several years, judging by the date and his father's youthful handwriting. The rain continued to hammer the garage roof as Marcus sat in the Roadrunner, holding the photograph and the mysterious key, feeling like he was seeing his father clearly for the first time. David Thompson hadn't just been the quiet factory worker who came home tired and spent his weekends tinkering in the garage. He'd been a young man once, in love with someone named Maria Santos, driving this same car when it was new and full of possibility instead of trapped under fluorescent lights for decades. Marcus's phone rang, startling him from his thoughts. It was Jim Morrison, his father's longtime friend and former co-worker from the plant. "Marcus, I heard about David. I'm so sorry I couldn't make it to the funeral. I was in Florida with my daughter. How are you holding up, son?" "Thanks, Mr. Morrison. Well, it's been rough. I'm actually sitting in Dad's garage right now, trying to figure some things out." "Ah, finally got into the inner sanctum, huh? That car was David's pride and joy. You know, I worked with your father for 25 years, and I swear he talked about that Roadrunner every single day. Not just the engine specs or the restoration work, but like it held some kind of special meaning for him." Marcus gripped the phone tighter. "Mr. Morrison, did my dad ever mention someone named Maria Santos to you?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line, filled with the kind of weighted silence that suggested Jim Morrison knew exactly who Marcus was talking about. "Where did you hear that name, Marcus?" "I found a photograph from 1971. She's standing next to the Roadrunner." Another pause, longer this time. "Marcus, there are some things about your father's past that, well, maybe it's time you knew the truth. But it's not something I can tell you over the phone. Can you meet me tomorrow morning? There's a diner on Market Street, Mickey's Place, 10 o'clock? "Mr. Morrison, what aren't you telling me? Who was Maria Santos?" "She was the love of your father's life, Marcus, and losing her is the reason he never drove that car again." The line went dead, leaving Marcus alone in the garage with more questions than answers, holding a photograph of a woman whose smile suggested she'd never imagined she would become a secret, kept for over 50 years. Outside, the October rain continued to fall on Youngstown, washing the streets clean, while secrets buried for decades began to surface in the most unexpected places. And in Chapter 2, Buried Secrets. Mickey's place hadn't changed since Marcus was a kid. Red vinyl booths held together with duct tape, a coffee pot that seemed to have been brewing the same batch since the Carter administration, and the perpetual smell of bacon grease and cigarettes that had soaked into the walls, despite Ohio's smoking ban. At 10:15 on a Tuesday morning, it was nearly empty, except for a few retired steelworkers, nursing coffee and reading newspapers that reported on a world that had moved on without them. Jim Morrison was already waiting in a corner booth, his weathered hands wrapped around a white ceramic mug. At 72, he still carried himself with the straight-backed posture of a man who'd spent decades on factory floors, but his eyes held the weight of someone carrying difficult truths. "Thanks for meeting me, Mr. Morrison," Marcus said, sliding into the booth across from him. The vinyl was cracked and uncomfortable, but it felt familiar in a way that was oddly comforting. "Jim is fine, Marcus. We're both adults now, and what I'm about to tell you, well, it's going to change how you see your father, maybe how you see your whole family." The waitress, a tired-looking woman in her 50s, approached with a coffee pot. "You want coffee, honey?" "Please." Marcus waited until she'd filled his cup and moved away before speaking again. "Jim, that photograph I found. Who was Maria Santos? And why has no one ever mentioned her to me?" Jim stared into his coffee for a long moment, as if the answers might be floating in the dark liquid. "Your father and I started at the plant on the same day in 1973. We were both young, both trying to figure out our lives after high school. David was different then, more open, more willing to talk about things. And he talked about Maria constantly. But the photograph is dated 1971. That's 2 years before you met him." "That's right. By the time I knew your father, Maria was already gone. But the way he talked about her—" Jim shook his head. "Marcus, I've been married to the same woman for 48 years, and I love her dearly. But I never talked about Janet the way your father talked about Maria Santos." Marcus pulled the photograph from his jacket pocket and placed it on the table between them. Jim's expression softened as he looked at the young woman's face. "She was beautiful," Jim said quietly. "Inside and out, according to David. They met in 1970 when she was working at her family's restaurant on the South Side. Your father had just bought that Road Runner, spent every penny he had saved from his job at the hardware store. He drove it to Santos' family restaurant one night, and Maria came out to admire the car. What happened to her?" Jim's face darkened. "That's where the story gets complicated, Marcus, and painful. Your father never told me the whole truth, but I pieced together what I could over the years. Maria got pregnant." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. "Pregnant? You mean I have a—" "Let me finish." Jim held up a hand. "This was 1971, remember? Different times, different rules. Maria's family was traditional, Catholic, didn't approve of her relationship with a Protestant boy from the wrong side of town. When they found out she was pregnant, they forbade her from seeing David." Marcus felt his understanding of his family history shifting beneath him like unstable ground. "But what happened to the baby? To Maria? Your father tried everything to see her, to convince her family to let them marry. He had that Road Runner and a steady job. He thought that would be enough. But Maria's parents had other plans. They sent her away to live with relatives in California until the baby was born. And then?" Jim's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "The baby was born in March 1972, a little girl, but there were complications during the delivery. Maria hemorrhaged and—" He couldn't finish the sentence. "She died," Marcus said, the words feeling hollow in his mouth. "She died, and the baby was put up for adoption. David never even got to say goodbye. He found out about Maria's death in a letter from her sister, weeks after the funeral. By then, the baby was already placed with a family somewhere in California, and the Santos family wanted nothing to do with him. Marcus stared at the photograph, understanding now why his father had kept it hidden for so long. This wasn't just a picture of an old girlfriend. It was the last image of the woman he'd loved and lost, along with their child. "That's why he never drove the car again," Marcus said, the pieces falling into place. It reminded him of her. Every time he looked at that Road Runner, he saw Maria admiring it that first night they met. He couldn't bear to drive it, but he couldn't bring himself to sell it either. It was like a monument to what might have been. Marcus thought about all those weekend mornings when his father would start the car and let it idle, the expression on his face that Marcus had never been able to interpret. It hadn't been pride in the machine, it had been grief for a lost love. But Jim, he married my mother just a few years later. He had Emma and me. He built a life. He did. And don't think for a second that he didn't love your mother or that he didn't love you kids. But Catherine knew about Maria from the beginning. David was honest with her about his past, about why he kept that car, but never drove it. Your mother was a remarkable woman, Marcus. She understood that some losses never fully heal, and she didn't try to make David forget Maria. She just helped him learn to live with the loss. This revelation recontextualized everything Marcus remembered about his parents' marriage. He'd always thought his father was distant because of his personality, but now he wondered if David had been protecting himself from getting too attached, too vulnerable to loss again. "There's more," Jim continued. "The safety deposit box key you found. I know about that too." Marcus's hand moved instinctively to his pocket where the key rested. "How do you—" "Because David asked me to drive him to Youngstown Trust and Savings every year on Maria's birthday, June 15th. He'd go in alone, spend maybe 20 minutes, then come out looking like he'd been through a war. This went on for decades, right up until the bank closed." "What was in the box?" "I never asked, and he never told me. But Marcus, when the bank closed, they transferred all the safety deposit boxes to a storage facility downtown. The contents are still there, waiting for someone with the right key and proper identification." Marcus felt his pulse quickening. "Where downtown?" "Mahoning Valley Storage on Federal Street. It's in one of those old warehouse buildings. The bank's former manager, Carol Yates, handles the transferred boxes. She's been trying to reach people for years to claim their belongings." Marcus pulled out his phone and started searching for the storage facility's information, but Jim reached over and gently stopped him. "Marcus, before you go down this road, you need to understand something. Your father kept these secrets for a reason. He was protecting everyone, you, Emma, even your mother while she was alive. Whatever's in that safety deposit box, it's going to tell you things about David that might be difficult to process." "I need to know," Marcus said firmly. "I spent my whole life thinking my father was just obsessed with a car. Now I find out he was carrying this enormous loss and I never even knew about it. Maybe if I'd understood, you think you could have helped him somehow?" "I don't know. Maybe. Or maybe I just would have been a better son if I'd known why he seemed so distant sometimes." Jim nodded slowly. "I understand that feeling. But Marcus, your father wasn't distant because he didn't love you. He was distant because he loved you too much to risk losing you the way he lost Maria. Some people respond to loss by holding everyone closer. Others learn to keep just enough distance to survive if something terrible happens again." Marcus thought about his own relationships, how he'd never quite committed fully to any of the women he'd dated, how he'd always held back just enough to maintain his independence. Perhaps his father's coping mechanisms had been passed down in ways neither of them had recognized. "Will you come with me to the storage facility?" Marcus asked. "If you want me there, of course. But this is your journey now, Marcus. Your father left you that key because he trusted you to handle whatever truth it unlocks." They finished their coffee in relative silence. both lost in thoughts about secrets and the weight they carry across generations. As they prepared to leave, Jim placed a hand on Marcus's shoulder. "One more thing you should know. The reason your father started working at the plant, the reason he took such a stable, reliable job instead of pursuing his dream of opening his own garage, it was all in case someday he could track down his daughter and provide for her. He never stopped hoping he might find her. Did he ever try to look for her? In the early days, yes. But adoption records were sealed tight back then, especially for out-of-state placements. It would have taken resources he didn't have and legal help he couldn't afford. Eventually, he had to accept that she was lost to him forever." As they walked out into the overcast October afternoon, Marcus realized that his father's legacy was far more complex than he'd ever imagined. The Road Runner wasn't just a car, it was a shrine to lost love. The garage wasn't just a workspace, it was a chapel where David had communed with his memories every weekend for nearly 40 years. And somewhere in a storage facility downtown, the final pieces of the puzzle were waiting to be discovered. But first, Marcus needed to call Emma. This story belonged to both of them now, and she deserved to know that their father's secrets were about to change everything they thought they knew about their family. Chapter 3. The Weight of Truth. The Mahoning Valley Storage Facility occupied a converted warehouse on Federal Street, its red brick exterior weathered by decades of Ohio winters and economic decline. Inside, fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Carol Yates, a thin woman in her 60s with kind eyes and graying hair, led Marcus and Emma through a maze of numbered storage units to a small office area where the transferred safety deposit boxes were maintained. Emma had caught the first flight out of Chicago after Marcus's phone call the night before, and she'd spent the entire drive from the airport in stunned silence, occasionally asking questions that Marcus couldn't answer. Now, standing in the storage facility office, she clutched the brass key in her hand like a talisman. "I've been managing these transferred boxes for almost 15 years, Carol explained, pulling out a thick ledger. "Your father was one of the most reliable visitors we had. Every June 15th, regular as clockwork, until about 5 years ago when his health started declining." "What stopped him from coming?" Emma asked. "His heart condition, I believe. He called once to ask if someone else could access the box on his behalf. But the legal requirements are quite strict. Only the holder or someone with explicit written permission and proper identification." Carol found the entry for David Thompson's box and cross-referenced it with Marcus's identification. "Everything appears to be in order. Box 247 has been waiting for someone from the family for quite some time." She led them to a small private room with a table and 2 chairs, then returned with a metal box about the size of a shoebox. "Take all the time you need, just let me know when you're finished." After Carol left, Marcus and Emma stared at the box sitting between them on the table. It was a moment that felt simultaneously anticlimactic and earth-shaking. A simple container that held the secrets their father had guarded for over 50 years. "Are you ready for this?" Emma asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't think anyone could be ready for this," Marcus replied, but he lifted the lid anyway. The contents were arranged with the same meticulous care their father had shown in organizing his garage. On top was a thick manila envelope marked Maria in David's handwriting. Beneath that were several smaller items, a hospital bracelet, a dried flower pressed between 2 pieces of glass, what appeared to be ultrasound photographs, and a bundle of letters tied with a faded blue ribbon. Emma picked up the ultrasound images first, her hands trembling slightly. "Oh my God, Marcus. These are from 1971. Look at the date." Marcus examined the fuzzy black and white images that showed the outline of a baby in the womb. "Our sister," he said quietly. "Dad kept ultrasound pictures of our sister." Emma's eyes filled with tears. "I can't believe he carried this alone for so long. Why didn't he ever tell us?" Marcus opened the manila envelope labeled Maria and found more photographs, some showing Maria and David together, others of just Maria, all capturing moments of happiness that felt achingly precious given how the story had ended. There was Maria laughing at something off camera, David's arm around her shoulders. Maria standing beside the Road Runner, her hand on the hood. Maria in what appeared to be a hospital room, holding a small bundle. She got to hold the baby, Emma said, looking over Marcus's shoulder. At least she got to hold her daughter before... The hospital bracelet was tiny, sized for an infant, with baby girl Santos written in faded blue ink. Seeing it made the reality of their half-sister's existence undeniable and heartbreaking at the same time, but it was the bundle of letters that held the most revelations. They were from Maria's sister, Eleanor Santos, and they spanned several decades. The earliest ones, from the 1970s, were harsh and accusatory, blaming David for Maria's death and demanding that he never contact the family again. But as the years progressed, the tone gradually shifted. Marcus read aloud from a letter dated 1985. "David, I know I told you never to write to us again, but I feel I owe you the truth about what happened to your daughter. Her name is Sophia, and she was adopted by the Martinez family in San Diego. They are good people who have given her a loving home. I thought you should know that she is healthy and happy, even if you can never be part of her life." "Sophia," Emma repeated. "Her name is Sophia." Marcus continued reading. "I was wrong to blame you for Maria's death. The complications during delivery were not your fault, and I know my sister loved you deeply. She spoke of you constantly during her time with us in California, and she never stopped believing that you would find a way to be together. I hope someday you can forgive our family for keeping you apart." The letters continued chronologically, with Elena providing occasional updates about Sophia's life, her adoption by the Martinez family, her academic achievements, her graduation from high school, then college. The final letter was dated just 3 years earlier. "David, I don't know if you're still receiving these letters, but I felt compelled to write once more. Sophia is now a grown woman with children of her own. She became a teacher, just like Maria always wanted to be. She doesn't know about you or her biological family, but she is living a good life. I'm enclosing her address, not because I think you should contact her, but because I thought you deserved to know where she ended up. Maria would be proud of the woman she became." Emma was crying openly now, and Marcus felt his own composure cracking. Their father had received updates about his daughter for decades, had known her name and her achievements, had watched her grow up from a distance through the letters of an aunt, who had gradually come to understand the depth of his loss. "There's something else," Marcus said, noticing another envelope at the bottom of the box. "This one was sealed and marked, 'For my children, when the time comes.' Inside was a letter in their father's handwriting, dated just 6 months before his death. 'Marcus and Emma, if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and you found the key I left in the Road Runner. I always hoped I'd find the courage to tell you about Maria and Sophia while I was alive, but every time I tried, the words wouldn't come. How do you explain to your children that they have a sister they've never met? How do you tell them that their father's heart was broken long before they were born and that it never fully healed? Maria Santos was the love of my life, and losing her and our daughter nearly destroyed me. I met your mother 3 years later, and Catherine saved me in every way a person can be saved. She knew about Maria from the beginning, and she never asked me to forget or to get rid of the car or to stop visiting the safety deposit box. She understood that some losses become part of who you are, and she loved me enough to accept that part of me would always belong to Maria. I kept the Road Runner because it was the last thing that connected me to Maria. Every time I started that engine, I could remember the night we met, the way she looked at the car with such wonder, the plans we made for the future we thought we'd have together. I couldn't drive it, because driving it would have meant moving forward. and I wasn't ready to leave Maria behind. But now it's time for the car to fulfill its real purpose. I've left money in an account at Fifth Third Bank. Account information is in my desk drawer at home. It's enough to restore the Road Runner to perfect condition and to travel to California. Sofia Martinez lives in San Diego. She's 51 years old now, married with 2 children. She deserves to know she has family who have always loved her, even from a distance. I'm not asking you to complicate her life or to disrupt the family she's built. But maybe, if you decide it's right, you could let her know about Maria, about the love story that brought her into the world, and about the father who never stopped thinking about her. The Road Runner was Maria's favorite color, plum crazy purple. Sofia has a right to know why. I'm sorry I never told you any of this while I was alive. I was afraid that telling you about the daughter I lost might make you feel like you weren't enough, when the truth is that you too were everything that kept me going after Maria died. You and your mother gave me a reason to live again, and I hope you can understand that loving Sofia from a distance never meant loving you any less. The key isn't just to the safety deposit box. It's to understanding why I was the father I was, why I held some things close and others at arm's length. I hope you can forgive an old man's mistakes and maybe finish the journey I never had the courage to complete. Drive the Road Runner, Marcus. It's been waiting 53 years to hit the road again. And Emma, use those investigative skills of yours to find Sofia if you think it's right. You two will know what to do better than I ever did. All my love, Dad. The room fell silent, except for the sound of Emma's quiet sobbing and the distant hum of the storage facility's heating system. Marcus folded the letter carefully, his mind reeling from the enormity of what they'd discovered. We have to find her, Emma said finally, wiping her eyes. We have to find Sofia. Are you sure? Dad was right. We could be turning her whole world upside down. She's built a life without knowing any of this. Emma looked at the photographs of Maria, at the ultrasound images, at the hospital bracelet that represented a life that had been shaped by loss from its very beginning. Marcus, what if it were you? What if you found out you had family you never knew about? Wouldn't you want to know the truth? Marcus thought about the past few days, about how learning the truth about his father had changed everything he thought he knew about his family. It had been painful, but it had also given him a deeper understanding of who David Thompson really was. Yeah, he said finally, I think I would want to know. And they spent another hour going through the remaining contents of the safety deposit box, more photographs, a lace handkerchief that had belonged to Maria, and a small wooden cross that Elena had sent with one of her letters. Each item told part of a story that had been unfolding in secret for over 50 years. As they prepared to leave the storage facility, Carol Yates approached them with a sympathetic expression. I hope you found what you were looking for, she said. We found more than we were looking for, Emma replied. Thank you for taking care of this for so long. Your father was a good man. He always spoke of you children with such pride. I think he would be happy that you finally know the whole story. Outside, the October afternoon had turned crisp and clear, the kind of weather that made Youngstown's decline seem temporarily suspended. Marcus and Emma walked to their cars in contemplative silence, both processing the weight of their father's revelations. So, what's our next step? Emma asked as they reached the parking lot. Marcus looked back at the storage facility, thinking about the Road Runner waiting in the garage, about the money their father had set aside for their journey, about a woman named Sofia Martinez, who had no idea that her biological father had spent 50 years loving her from a distance. First we restore the car, he said. Then we drive it to California, just like Dad wanted. And then we figure out how to tell our sister that she's not alone in the world. Emma nodded, her reporter's instincts already working on the logistics. I can start researching her online, see what I can find out about her life now. Maybe figure out the best way to approach this. As they parted ways, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that their father was somehow watching, Finally at peace, knowing that the secrets he'd carried alone for so long were now shared with the children who could complete the journey he'd never been able to finish. The Road Runner had been waiting 53 years to fulfill its destiny. Now, finally, it was time to hit the road. Chapter 4. The Road to Redemption. 3 weeks later, the transformed Road Runner sat gleaming in the Thompson driveway, its plum-crazy purple paint restored to show car perfection by Tommy Kowalski, the best body shop owner left in Youngstown. The 446-pack engine had been rebuilt from the ground up, the interior detailed until it looked like it had just rolled off the 1971 assembly line, and every chrome surface polished to a mirror finish. Marcus ran his hand along the hood, marveling at how the car had been reborn under Tommy's skilled hands. The restoration had cost most of the money their father had set aside, but seeing the Road Runner in its full glory made every penny worthwhile. This wasn't just a car anymore, it was a bridge between the past and the future, between a father's unfulfilled dreams and his children's determination to honor them. Emma emerged from the house carrying 2 duffel bags and a laptop case, her face showing a mixture of excitement and nervousness that had been building since they'd decided to make the cross-country trip. Over the past 3 weeks, her journalistic skills had proven invaluable in tracking down information about Sophia Martinez. "I found her Facebook page," Emma had announced during one of their planning sessions. "She teaches 4th grade at Sunset Elementary in San Diego. She's married to a man named Carlos, and they have 2 kids, Miguel, who's 16, and Isabella, who's 13. She posts pictures of her classroom, her family, their camping trips. She looks happy, Marcus. Really happy." That happiness had given both siblings pause. Were they about to disrupt a perfectly content life with revelations that might change everything? But their father's letter had been clear. Sophia deserved to know the truth about her origins, about the love story that had brought her into the world, and about the family who had never stopped thinking about her. "You ready for this?" Emma asked as she loaded her bags into the Road Runner's trunk. "As ready as I'll ever be," Marcus replied, though his stomach was churning with anticipation. He'd driven the restored car around Youngstown several times, getting used to its power and personality, but this would be its first real journey in over 50 years. They'd planned the route carefully, Interstate 80 west through Pennsylvania, Ohio, and Indiana, then south through Illinois and Missouri, before picking up Interstate 40 toward California. It would take them through the heart of America, past small towns and big cities, through landscapes that had changed dramatically since 1971, but somehow remained fundamentally the same. As Marcus started the engine, the 446-pack roared to life with a deep, throaty growl that seemed to shake the entire neighborhood. Mrs. Patterson from next door came out on her porch to wave goodbye, and Marcus could swear he saw tears in her eyes. She'd lived next to the Thompsons for 30 years and had probably heard that engine start up hundreds of times during David's weekend rituals. "He would be so proud," she called out over the engine noise. Marcus felt his throat tighten with emotion. "I think he would be too," he called back. The first few hours of driving were pure revelation. The Road Runner handled like a dream, its power plant delivering smooth acceleration and a highway cruising experience that reminded Marcus why American muscle cars had been the kings of the road in their era. Emma alternated between taking pictures of the passing scenery and researching more details about Sophia's life on her laptop. She graduated from UC San Diego with a degree in elementary education, Emma reported as they crossed into Pennsylvania. She's been teaching at Sunset Elementary for 12 years. Before that, she worked at a different school in the district. Her husband Carlos owns a landscaping business. Any indication that she knows she's adopted? Nothing obvious from her social media, but people don't usually post about that kind of thing. Her last name is Martinez, so she either took her husband's name or was adopted by the Martinez family, just like Elena Santos said in her letters. They stopped for lunch at a truck stop in Indiana, the roadrunner drawing admiring glances and questions from other travelers. An elderly man approached as Marcus was filling the gas tank. "That's a beautiful roadrunner," the man said. "1971? That's right. It belonged to my father." "He restored it himself?" Marcus paused, thinking about how to answer that question. "In a way, yes. It took him 53 years, but he finally got it back on the road." The man nodded appreciatively, not catching the deeper meaning behind Marcus's words. "Well, he did a hell of a job. That paint is spectacular. Plum crazy purple. That was Plymouth's wildest color." As they continued west, Marcus found himself thinking about all the conversations his father must have imagined having with Sophia over the years. Had David pictured teaching her to drive in this car? Had he wondered if she inherited his mechanical aptitude or Maria's artistic sensibility? Had he imagined family gatherings where Sophia's children would climb all over their grandfather's famous roadrunner? "I keep thinking about what we're going to say to her," Emma said as they crossed the Mississippi River near St. Louis. "How do you start that conversation? 'Hi, we're your half-siblings from Ohio, and our father was your biological father who you never knew existed.'" "Maybe we start with the story," Marcus suggested. "Tell her about Maria and Dad, about the love they shared. Help her understand that she was created by something beautiful, not just given away because she wasn't wanted." They spent the night in a motel outside Springfield, Missouri. The roadrunner parked directly outside their room, where Marcus could keep an eye on it. Neither of them slept particularly well, the weight of their mission becoming more real with each mile they traveled. The next day brought them through Oklahoma and into Texas, the landscape opening up into vast stretches of plains and sky that seemed to put their journey into cosmic perspective. Somewhere ahead of them in San Diego, a woman was going about her daily routine with no idea that her entire understanding of her family history was about to change. "I found something else," Emma said as they crossed into New Mexico. Sophia volunteers at a local animal shelter on weekends, and get this, she drives a purple car. It's a Honda Civic, not a muscle car, but still purple. Marcus smiled at that coincidence. Dad would have loved that detail. "There's something else, Marcus. Something that might make this easier." Emma turned her laptop screen so he could see it during a brief traffic stop. She posted something on Facebook last month about feeling disconnected from her roots. She wrote about how she's always wondered about her birth parents and whether she has any biological siblings. Marcus felt a surge of hope. So she knows she's adopted? It looks like it. And more than that, it sounds like she's been thinking about trying to find her biological family. Maybe we're not going to be as disruptive as we thought. They spent their second night in Albuquerque, and Marcus called Jim Morrison to update him on their progress. "How's the car running?" Jim asked. "Like a dream. Dad would have been amazed at how well it performs on the highway. I think it's actually happier to be moving again than it was sitting in the garage all those years. Cars are meant to be driven, not admired. Your father knew that, but he couldn't bring himself to do it. I'm glad you could. Jim, were we right to do this, to dig up the past and potentially complicate Sophia's life?" There was a pause before Jim answered. "Marcus, some secrets are kept to protect people, and others are kept because we're afraid of the truth. Your father's secret started as protection. He didn't want to disrupt Sophia's life or burden you kids with his loss. But over the years, I think it became something else. It became his way of holding on to Maria, of keeping her memory alive. By telling Sophia the truth, you're not betraying that memory. You're honoring it." The final day of driving took them through Arizona and into California, the roadrunner performing flawlessly, despite being pushed harder than it had been since the Nixon administration. As they crested the mountains east of San Diego and saw the Pacific Ocean spread out before them, Marcus felt a profound sense of completion, as if the car itself was sighing with relief at finally reaching its destination. They checked into a hotel near Sunset Elementary and spent the evening driving past Sophia's school, her house, the animal shelter where she volunteered. It felt strange to be surveilling their sister's life, but they wanted to understand her world before they entered it. "She has a garden," Emma observed as they drove slowly past Sophia's modest suburban home. "Look at all those flowers in the front yard." "Maria wanted to be a teacher," Marcus said, remembering the letters from Elena Santos. "And she loved flowers. Dad used to bring her bouquets every time he visited her at the restaurant." The next morning, they positioned themselves in the parking lot of Sunset Elementary just before school let out, the Road Runner gleaming in the California sunshine. Marcus felt like his heart might explode from his chest as children began streaming out of the building, followed by teachers and staff. Then he saw her. Sophia Martinez was 51 years old, but she moved with the energy of someone much younger. Her dark hair was streaked with premature silver, and she wore a colorful dress that somehow made her look both professional and approachable. But it was her smile that stopped Marcus's breath. It was Maria's smile, identical to the one in the photograph he'd been carrying since that first day in the garage. "That's her," Emma whispered. "Oh my God, Marcus, she looks just like the pictures of Maria." Sophia was walking toward the parking lot, chatting with another teacher, when she noticed the Road Runner. She stopped mid-sentence, her eyes widening as she took in the car's restored magnificence. She said something to her colleague and walked over, her expression showing the same wonder that Marcus had seen in his father's photographs of Maria admiring the car 53 years earlier. "Excuse me," Sophia said, approaching the driver's side window. "I hope you don't mind me asking, but is this a 1971 Road Runner?" Marcus's mouth went dry. This was the moment that would change everything for all of them. "Yes, it is," he managed to say. "It belonged to my father. It's absolutely beautiful. That color is incredible. Plum crazy purple, right? I've always loved that color." She paused, studying his face with the intuitive perception of someone who'd spent years working with children. "I'm sorry, but do we know each other? You look familiar somehow." Emma leaned forward from the passenger seat. "Sophia Martinez?" "Yes, that's me. How did you—" "My name is Emma Thompson, and this is my brother Marcus. We've driven here from Ohio because we have something to tell you. Something about your biological family." Sophia's expression shifted from curiosity to shock, to something that looked like hope. "My biological family? You know something about my birth parents?" Marcus turned off the engine and got out of the car, Emma following suit. They stood in the school parking lot with the Road Runner between them and their sister. Three strangers connected by bonds they were only beginning to understand. "Sophia," Marcus said, his voice steady despite the emotions churning inside him. "Our father was David Thompson. He was your biological father. And we're here because he wanted you to know that he never stopped loving you, not for a single day of his life." Sophia's hand flew to her mouth, tears immediately springing to her eyes. "My father? My real father?" "Your birth mother's name was Maria Santos," Emma said gently. "They were very much in love, but circumstances kept them apart. Maria died shortly after you were born, and Dad spent the rest of his life wondering about you, loving you from a distance. Is he still alive?" Marcus shook his head. "He passed away last month, but before he died he left us instructions to find you, to tell you about Maria, and to bring you this car. It was Maria's favorite color, and Dad kept it all these years as a way of staying connected to both of you." Sophia walked around the Road Runner, her fingers trailing along its surfaces, as if she were touching a piece of her history. "All my life I've wondered about them. My adoptive parents were wonderful. They never kept the adoption secret, but I always wondered about my birth parents, about why they couldn't keep me." "They wanted to keep you more than anything," Emma said, But Maria's family wouldn't allow them to marry, and when Maria died, Dad was just a 20-year-old kid with no legal rights and no way to fight for you. "Tell me about them," Sophia said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Tell me about Maria and David. Tell me about my parents." For the next hour, in the parking lot of Sunset Elementary, Marcus and Emma shared the story of David and Maria's love affair, the road runner that had brought them together, the pregnancy that had separated them, and the decades of grief and remembrance that had followed. They showed Sophia the photographs from the safety deposit box, the ultrasound images, the hospital bracelet, and the letters from her Aunt Elena. "Aunt Elena," Sophia repeated, studying the letters. "I always wondered if I had other family. Are there others? Cousins, grandparents?" "Elena might still be alive," Emma said. "She'd be in her 70s now. We could help you try to find her." Sophia looked at the Roadrunner again, then at Marcus and Emma, her brother and sister, words that felt both foreign and completely natural. "I can't believe this is real," she said. "I can't believe I have siblings. I can't believe my father kept this car all these years because it reminded him of my mother." "There's more," Marcus said. "Dad left instructions for us to restore the car and drive it here, but he also wanted you to have it. If you want it. The Road Runner is yours, Sophia. It always was." Sophia stared at him in disbelief. "He wanted me to have his car? But it must be worth a fortune, and you two barely know me." "We know enough," Emma interrupted. "We know you're our sister. We know Dad loved you, and we know this car has been waiting 53 years to fulfill its real purpose." Sophia began crying then, not the quiet tears she'd been shedding throughout their conversation, but the deep, cathartic sobs of someone whose deepest questions had finally been answered. Marcus and Emma moved instinctively to embrace her, and for several minutes the three siblings stood together in the California sunshine, holding each other and grieving for the father and mother they'd lost, celebrating the family they'd found. "I teach a unit on family trees every year," Sophia said when she could speak again. "I always tell my students that families come in all shapes and sizes, that what matters isn't how a family is formed, but how much love it contains. I never imagined I'd be living proof of my own lesson." "What will you tell Carlos and the kids?" Emma asked. Sophia smiled through her tears. "The truth, that their mom just discovered she has a brother and sister who drove across the country to find her, that their grandfather was a man who loved so deeply that he kept a car for 50 years as a monument to their grandmother's memory. They're going to be amazed." And bam, as the afternoon wore on, they made plans for Sophia to meet her new extended family. Carlos and the children would join them for dinner that evening, and Emma would extend her stay in California for a few days to help Sophia process everything and begin planning a trip to Ohio to see where David had lived and worked. "There's one more thing," Marcus said as they prepared to part ways. "Dad's house is still sitting exactly as he left it. Emma and I couldn't bring ourselves to change anything yet. If you want to see his workshop, his bedroom, the garage where the Roadrunner lived for so many years, it's all there waiting." Sophia nodded eagerly. "I'd love that. I want to understand who he was, how he lived, what he cared about besides this car and my mother's memory." As Sophia prepared to drive home to break the news to her family, she paused beside the Roadrunner one more time. "You know what the strangest part of all this is?" she said. "I've always been drawn to classic cars, especially muscle cars from the early 70s. Carlos thinks I'm crazy, but I stop and stare at them whenever I see them. Now I know why." Marcus smiled. "Dad always said the Roadrunner had personality. Maybe it was calling to you all these years." "Maybe it was," Sophia agreed. "Or maybe it was him." That evening, at a restaurant overlooking San Diego Bay, Marcus and Emma had dinner with their new extended family. Carlos Martinez proved to be a warm, thoughtful man who listened to the story with amazement and immediately welcomed his wife's newfound siblings into their lives. Miguel and Isabella were initially shy, but quickly warmed up to their new uncle and aunt, especially when Marcus promised to teach Miguel to drive the Road Runner if his parents approved. "This is like something out of a movie," Isabella said, studying the old photographs of her grandmother Maria. "She was so pretty, and she looks just like Mom." "She does," Emma agreed. "Your mom inherited Maria's eyes and her smile, and I think she inherited her love of teaching, too." "Will you tell us more stories about our grandfather?" Miguel asked. "What was he like?" Marcus thought about David Thompson, the quiet man who'd raised him, the loving but distant father who'd never quite learned how to express his deepest emotions, the heartbroken young man who'd lost everything that mattered to him and somehow found the strength to build a new life. "He was complicated," Marcus said finally. "He loved deeply but quietly. He worked hard and never complained. He taught me to be responsible and honest, even when he couldn't be completely honest about his own past, and he would have been so proud to meet all of you." Later that night, back at their hotel, Marcus and Emma sat by the pool under the stars, processing the surreal day they'd just experienced. "I keep thinking about Dad," Emma said. "All those years he spent wondering about Sophia, and she was living this beautiful life, raising these amazing kids, becoming the teacher Maria always wanted to be. I think he would have been so happy to know she turned out okay." "More than okay," Marcus agreed. "She's remarkable, and those kids, Dad would have spoiled them absolutely rotten. So, what happens now? To the Road Runner? To Sophia? To us?" Marcus considered the question. "I think the Road Runner finally gets to be what it was always meant to be, not a museum piece or a monument to loss, but a car that brings a family together. Sophia can decide what she wants to do with it, but I have a feeling it's going to get driven a lot more than it has in the past 50 years. And us? We have a sister now, and she has a brother and sister. I don't think any of us are going to let that go easily." The next morning, before they left San Diego, Sophia met them at their hotel with a proposal that caught them both off guard. "I want to drive the Road Runner back to Ohio with you," she said. "Carlos thinks I'm crazy, but he understands. I need to see where I came from, where David lived, where Maria's story began, and I think the car needs all three of us to complete this journey." So it was that 3 days later, the Road Runner began its return trip east with Sophia behind the wheel, Marcus in the passenger seat teaching her the car's quirks and personality, and Emma following in a rental car with Sophia's luggage and the boxes of photographs and letters they'd shared. The drive back was everything the trip west had been and more. A journey of discovery that transformed strangers into siblings, that turned a car into a bridge between past and future, that proved their father's faith in the healing power of truth had been justified. When they pulled into the driveway on Oak Street in Youngstown 6 days later, Sophia stepped out of the Road Runner and stood looking at the modest house where her father had lived and loved and grieved for over 4 decades. "He's here," she said simply. "I can feel him here." And Marcus realized she was right. David Thompson's presence filled the garage where the Road Runner had waited so patiently, lingered in the kitchen where he'd eaten breakfast alone for years, whispered through the rooms where he'd kept his secrets and his sorrows. But now those secrets had been transformed into connections, those sorrows into understanding. The Road Runner sat gleaming in the October sunshine, its plum crazy purple paint reflecting the golden leaves of the maple tree David had planted the year Marcus was born. After 53 years of waiting, it had finally completed its most important journey, not across the miles between Ohio and California, but across the generations between a father's unfulfilled dreams and his children's determination to honor them. Sophia walked to the car and placed her hand on the hood, closing her eyes for a moment as if listening to voices only she could hear. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for keeping her memory alive. Thank you for never giving up on me. Thank you for trusting Marcus and Emma to find me." Marcus felt tears streaming down his face as he watched his sister commune with their father's memory. This was what David had wanted, not just for Sophia to know the truth, but for all his children to understand that love doesn't diminish when it's shared, that families can be found and rebuilt and healed even after decades of separation. The Road Runner had been many things over the years, a symbol of love, a monument to loss, a repository for secrets, a bridge between past and future. But in the end, it had become what David Thompson had always intended it to be, a way for his children to find each other and to understand that they had never been alone in the world, even when they thought they were. As the sun set over Youngstown that evening, three siblings stood together in their father's garage, planning the future around a car that had spent 53 years waiting for this moment. Sophia would keep the Road Runner but visit often, bringing Carlos and the children to meet their extended family and to learn about the grandfather who had loved them before he ever knew they existed. Emma would write the story, not for publication, but for the family, preserving the details of David and Maria's love affair and the journey that had brought them all together. And Marcus would continue to care for their father's house, turning it into a place where all the Thompson children, biological and adopted, Ohio-born and California-raised, could gather and remember and celebrate the complicated, beautiful legacy of a man who had loved deeply and quietly for his entire life. The Road Runner's engine started with its familiar rumble as Sophia prepared to take it for one more drive through the neighborhoods where her father had grown up. But this time, the sound wasn't mournful or nostalgic. It was joyful, purposeful, alive with possibility. David Thompson's journey was complete, but his children's was just beginning. And they would make it together, connected by love and loss and the enduring power of truth to heal even the deepest wounds. The key had unlocked more than a safety deposit box. It had unlocked a family. And the Road Runner, after 53 years of patient waiting, was finally free to roam. Epilogue. 1 year later, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the cemetery as Marcus, Emma, and Sophia walked together toward their father's grave, their arms full of fresh flowers. It was June 15th, Maria's birthday, and they had established this as their annual tradition, a day to honor both their father's memory and the woman whose love had shaped all their lives. Sophia knelt beside the simple granite headstone, placing a bouquet of purple irises at its base. "I brought pictures of the kids' school year," she said softly, as if David could hear her. "Miguel made the honor roll, and Isabella joined the debate team. They ask about you all the time." The past year had been a whirlwind of discovery and healing. Sophia had made 3 trips to Ohio, each visit revealing new layers of their father's life and deepening the bonds between the siblings. The house on Oak Street had been transformed from a monument to solitude into a gathering place for family celebrations, holiday dinners, and quiet conversations about the man who had brought them all together. Carlos and the children had embraced their new extended family with warmth that still amazed Marcus. Miguel had indeed learned to drive the Road Runner under careful supervision and had become obsessed with classic cars. Isabella had started a school project about adoption and family trees that had won the state science fair. Both children now spent part of their summers in Ohio, learning about their grandfather's life and their own roots. Emma had taken a leave of absence from her Chicago journalism job to write a book about their father's story, not for publication, but as a family legacy. The manuscript, titled The Key to Everything, sat on David's old desk in the garage, surrounded by the photographs and letters that had revealed their family's hidden history. "I still can't believe he kept this secret for so long," Emma said, adjusting the flowers on the grave. "All those years of wondering why he seemed distant, why he spent so much time with that car." "He wasn't distant," Sophia replied, standing and brushing dirt from her knees. "He was protecting himself. And protecting us. He knew that loving someone completely meant risking complete loss. Marcus nodded, understanding now the man his father had been. David Thompson had lost the love of his life at 21 and had spent the rest of his days learning how to love again without losing himself in the process. It had made him careful, sometimes remote, but never uncaring. "I keep thinking about what might have been different if he'd told us while he was alive," Marcus said. "Maybe nothing would have been different," Sophia suggested. "Maybe he needed to wait until we were ready to handle the truth. Maybe he needed to wait until I was ready to be found." They walked back toward the parking lot where the Road Runner waited, its plum-crazy purple paint gleaming in the late afternoon light. Sophia had decided to keep the car in Ohio, storing it in David's garage and driving it whenever she visited. It had become a symbol of connection rather than separation, a bridge between California and Ohio, between past and present. "There's something I need to tell you both," Sophia said as they reached the car. "Carlos and I have been talking, and we've decided to buy a house here in Youngstown. The kids want to be closer to their Ohio family, and I want to be near Dad's grave, near the place where Maria's story began." Marcus felt his heart leap. "Seriously? You'd move back here?" "Sunset Elementary has offered me a position for next year. The pay isn't as good as California, but money isn't everything. Family is everything." Emma threw her arms around Sophia, tears streaming down her face. "I can't believe it. We'll actually be together, all of us in the same place." "Speaking of which," Emma continued, wiping her eyes, "I have news too. The Tribune offered me a position as senior correspondent for the Midwest region. I'll be based in Chicago, but I'll be traveling through Ohio regularly. I can see you both all the time." Marcus looked at his sisters, one biological, one discovered, and felt the pieces of his life clicking into place in ways he'd never imagined possible. The lonely boy who'd grown up watching his father commune with a silent car had found his voice, his purpose, his family. "Dad would be so happy," he said simply. As they drove through Youngstown in the gathering dusk, Sophia behind the wheel of the Road Runner, with Marcus beside her, and Emma following in her rental car, Marcus thought about the chain of events that had brought them to this moment. A heart attack, a cryptic will, a brass key, and a 53-year-old car had conspired to reveal a love story that had been waiting decades to be told. They stopped at Santos Family Restaurant, now run by Elena Santos's grandson, where the elderly woman who had written those letters to David for so many years was waiting to meet the children of the man she'd learned to respect and the sister she'd never known existed. Elena, now 78 and moving slowly but with dignity and tact, embraced Sophia with tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. "You look so much like her," Elena whispered. "So much like Maria. She would be so proud of the woman you became, the family you built, the children you're raising." "Tell me about her," Sophia said, settling into a booth across from her aunt. "Tell me everything you remember." As Elena began sharing memories of Maria's childhood, her dreams of becoming a teacher, her love of purple flowers and classic cars, Marcus felt the final pieces of their family puzzle sliding into place. This wasn't just about solving a mystery or honoring their father's memory. It was about creating something new from something that had been broken, building bridges across time and distance and loss. Later that evening, back at the house on Oak Street, the three siblings sat in David's garage around his old workbench, planning their future. Sophia's move to Ohio would take months to arrange, but they were already discussing which room would be best for Miguel and Isabella when they visited, how to expand the garden to include the purple irises that had been Maria's favorite flowers, and whether the garage was big enough to accommodate Carlos's landscaping equipment alongside the Road Runner. "You know what I keep thinking about?" Emma said, looking around the space that had been their father's sanctuary for so many years. "All those weekends when he'd come out here and start up the car just to hear it run. We thought he was being obsessive, but he was really having conversations with Maria. He was telling her about us, about Mom, about the life he'd built without her, and maybe telling her that someday he'd find the courage to let Sophia know about the love that created her, Marcus added. Sophia ran her hand along the Roadrunner's hood, a gesture that had become as natural to her as it had once been to David. "I've been thinking about something Elena said tonight, about how Maria always believed that love was stronger than separation, that somehow the people we love find their way back to us." "You think she was right? Look around," Sophia said, gesturing to encompass the garage, the house, the family they'd built from secrets and sorrow. "A year ago, you two thought you were alone in the world except for each other. I thought I was an only child whose birth parents were probably dead. Dad died thinking his greatest love story was a tragedy with no redemption." She paused, her voice growing stronger. "But here we are. We found each other. We learned the truth. We discovered that Dad's love for Maria didn't end when she died. It grew and changed and eventually led us to each other. If that's not love being stronger than separation, I don't know what is." Marcus looked at his sisters, at the car that had preserved their father's deepest secret until they were ready to receive it, at the garage that had been transformed from a shrine to solitude into the heart of a reunited family. "So what happens next?" he asked. Emma smiled, the same smile that had charmed news sources and interview subjects throughout her career, but warmer now, more authentic. "Next we live. We build the family Dad always wanted to have but never knew how to create. We make sure Miguel and Isabella grow up knowing their entire history, not just part of it. We keep Maria's memory alive by living the kind of lives she would have wanted for her daughter. And we drive the Roadrunner," Sophia added with a grin. "Lots. Dad kept it preserved for 53 years, but I think it's time it remembered what it was built for." "Which was what?" Marcus asked, though he thought he knew the answer. "Adventure," Sophia replied. "Family road trips, making memories, being alive instead of just being preserved." As if summoned by their conversation, the Roadrunner's engine roared to life. Sophia had apparently been holding the keys and decided to punctuate her point with horsepower. The familiar rumble filled the garage, but this time it didn't sound mournful or nostalgic. It sounded like possibility. "Last one," Marcus said, shouting over the engine noise. "Tomorrow we're taking it for a real drive, all of us together. No destination except wherever the road leads us." "Deal," Emma called back. "Deal," Sophia agreed. Outside, the October night was clear and cold, full of stars that seemed to shine with particular brightness over Youngstown, Ohio. Inside the garage on Oak Street, 3 siblings sat with their father's restored Roadrunner, planning adventures and sharing stories and building the kind of family their father had dreamed of but never believed he deserved. The key had indeed unlocked everything, not just a safety deposit box or a car's ignition, but the understanding that love doesn't end with death, that families can be lost and found and rebuilt, and that sometimes the most precious inheritances are the ones that come wrapped in mystery and delivered by fate. David Thompson's Roadrunner had finally found its true purpose, not as a monument to what was lost, but as a vehicle for what could still be found. And as the engine settled into a smooth idle, the 3 people who had inherited his greatest treasure settled into the comfortable silence of a family that had learned to speak the same language of love, loss, and hope. The road ahead stretched endlessly, full of possibilities their father had never dared to imagine, but his children, all 3 of them, were ready for the journey. The end. Thanks for watching. Some cars come back to life, others bring someone back with them. See you in the next story, right here on Rust and Memory.